Right, so these little guys are springtails, which are hexapods belonging to the subclass Columbola. They're detritivores which feed on organic waste like decaying plant matter and animal poop. They're an important component to be considered in the health and longevity of our terrariums. Things like mould can be mitigated and controlled when springtails are added, and dead or otherwise spent leaves from plants can be broken down and recycled back into constituent nutrients, ready for plants to uptake again for new growth. This is what makes our terrariums bioactive, but it's the presence of microorganisms like detritivores, like springtails, bacteria and fungi which allow the nitrogen cycle to complete, and it allows the terrarium to reach a point of equilibrium. So springtails are named pretty uncreatively for the tail-like appendage on the underside of their abdomen. This allows them to spring, or more or less yeet themselves at Mach 4 speeds. This appendage is called the furcula, and the simplified version is the furcula is held under tension against their abdomen, which flings into the ground when a little latch is released, and that in turn launches them through the air. Now, for the common springtails, which are usually used as cleanup crew in our terrariums, the easiest method I find of culturing them is just on straight charcoal. I use horticultural charcoal, but you can also use lumpwood charcoal. You just need to make sure there's no additives present. Charcoal I find is, great because it's relatively cheap, it's chemically inert, and it provides a huge amount of surface area for the springtails if it's broken down into small pieces. The first thing you'll want to do is to rinse the charcoal off to get off any dust, and there will be dust. It's a good idea to do this outside in a bucket if you're concerned about making a mess. I'm pretty blasé about this sort of thing, but there will be dust. Next, you'll want to portion out your rinsed charcoal into containers. I use standard deli containers since these will go on to be the springtail cultures I sell, but you can use larger containers without issue. You just want to make sure it's airtight. So springtails are highly resistant to carbon dioxide and can survive comfortably well beyond levels which would be lethal for most vertebrates, with Falsomia candida, the species I'm culturing today, having been shown to survive upwards of 3 weeks at 6 times atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, which is insane. Next, we're going to seed the new cultures with springtails from an existing culture. I find the easiest way to add springtails is through flooding the existing culture and then draining off the excess water into the new cultures. So springtails float on the water surface, and this makes it one of the easier methods for shuffling them around as needed. Use your best judgment on how much you want to add to each culture. Obviously, adding more at this stage will speed up the process of the new culture becoming established, but I don't mind waiting a little longer personally if it means I can produce more cultures in one sitting. Once the springtails have been added, you'll just want to make sure that there's a small amount of water in the bottom of the cultures, ideally around 5 or 6 millimeters. This is really important as springtails are particularly susceptible to drying out and desiccation if the humidity isn't maintained at a very high level, and if your culture ever crashes, it will be because of either drying out or contamination through fouled food. Now, in terms of feeding, I like to use baker's yeast as the springtails breed really well and thrive on a diet of it for the purposes of culturing, and I find there's very little, if any at all, to be honest, off-gassing which could sour the environment inside of the cultures. It's really important as well that you make sure you're getting baker's yeast and not brewer's yeast. Brewer's yeast, I find, has a higher propensity of off-gassing, and you can basically nuke your colony in these tiny deli cups with it. In terms of how often you want to feed, less is more with springtails. I tend to eyeball it and feed a small pinch based on the density of the colony, but if you're not sure where to start or how much to feed, then a good way is by feeding a very small amount, observing over the next few days how long it takes for the yeast to be fully eaten, then adding more. It'll give you a good chance to more or less hone in on the feeding needs of your colony at that particular stage. I should mention as well, when feeding, it's a good chance to allow for a little atmospheric gas exchange to bring in some clean air to the colonies. 10 seconds or so, more than ample. In terms of storing them, I keep my cultures at roughly room temperature in a dark spot. Springtails are incredibly hardy, and if the temperature drops into single digits, they'll still be fine. Just make sure the temperatures don't get too high. If you're comfortable, then guarantee the springtails are comfortable too. And that's it. That's all it really takes to culture springtails. Thanks for watching. Catch ya.